Hey guys, tonight we journey into one of the most crowded, stinky, and surprisingly chaotic spots of the Middle Ages, the medieval inn, and spoiler, you probably won't survive this without at least one stomach flip. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a sea of mud and manure in the inn's sprawling courtyard, your boots sinking with each step as if the earth itself wants to swallow you whole. Horse dung and dust swirl around your ankles, drifting up to cloak you in an invisible gritty layer. The inn's timber-framed archway looms ahead, its supporting beams sagging under centuries of damp and spilled ale. Mainstream fact. A gust of wind carries the blended aroma of sweaty travelers' rotting straw and a whiff of smoked herring from the cookhouse. You inhale deeply, regretting it almost instantly. Stable hands shout as they lead snorting horses toward rickety stalls. And you dodge a stray mule, braying at a group of pilgrims huddled by a trough. Lanterns swing in the half-light, illuminating travelers, haggling over stall fees and delivery of yesterday's oats. Historians still argue whether inns prioritized local guests or merely functioned as convenient way stations for long-distance traders. Open scholarly debate. You press your cloak tighter, reminding yourself that personal space here is as mythical as dragons. As you step beneath the low, rough-hewn doorway, a fringe rumor flits through your mind. Some inns secretly added powdered foxglove to their ale barrels as an herbal sleep aid for persistent guests, though you can't decide whether that's brilliant hospitality or medieval malpractice. Quirky tidbit. You shake the thought away and peer into the common room. Wooden benches and table stretch wall to wall, and the din of voices roars like a tidal wave of gossip. Faces flush with warmth and ale. Bodies huddle against drafts, and every surface bears the scars of takeaway meals. Past smashed tankards, scorched flagons, and crusty footprints in every conceivable corner. Your stomach grumbles louder than a siege engine, reminding you that you haven't eaten since yesterday's rations. Misery loves company, so you find a narrow space alongside a weary merchant counting coins by torchlight. You slide onto the bench with a squeak and attempt to joke one. I haven't felt this popular since I lost my Wi-Fi. The merchant glances up unimpressed and returns to his arithmetic. Apparently, medieval merchants aren't big on stand-up. Overhead, the ceiling beams creak ominously, laden with hanging cured meats and clay lanterns filled with rancid oil. You consider modern fire codes and shudder. You notice a spider the size of a walnut weaving its web between ropes of sausages, proof that insect control was a noble dream. Mainstream fact. You try not to think about the protein content. 3 flickers of torchlight reveal a tapestry, pinned crookedly to the wall, emblazoned with local heraldry, and little else. Fringe accounts suggest some innkeepers displayed such tapestries to mask smoke stains, decor, and damage control. In one quirky tidbit, a gruff barkeep appears, wooden mug in hand, and slides you a foaming ale. You cradle the cold wood, hoping the contents taste less toxic than the courtyard air. You lift the rim and sniff yeasty sour, with a hint of something you hope is barley, not brine. You take a cautious sip and nearly choke. Your face contorts into a smile that reads, "This is fine." You muster joke too. Ah yes, my favorite flavor, medieval mold. The barkeep smirks but doesn't offer a refill, As you down the aisle, you notice the flicker of candlelight on a bearded troubadour, tuning a lute in the corner. You imagine a soothing ballad until he strums a sour chord that grates like nails on a blackboard. Historians still argue whether musical entertainment in inns aim to calm weary travelers or compete with their hangovers. Open scholarly debate. You lean away, grateful your ears survived the first encounter. Pilgrims in threadbare cloaks share cheap bread with hungry children, while a boisterous band of merchants slam dice on a battered tabletop to settle trades or grudges. You recall a fringe tale that some dice were weighted to ensure house wins, fueling both profit and fury. Quirky tidbit. You watch the shooter roll snake eyes for the third time and you nearly offer your dice, though you suspect fair play is in short supply. Your knees ache from the hard plank bench, so you shift to stretch your cramped legs accidentally, kicking a small dog curled beneath the table. The pup yelps and scuttles into a nearby shadow, prompting a chorus of curses from its owner. You whisper joke 3, talk about rough service. The inn's patrons barely notice. Survival here demands steel nerves. A group of traders breaks into a bawdy song, voices rising and crashing as mugs slam and feet stomp. The melody is infectious and you find your foot tapping despite yourself. The tavern's closing hour is ambiguous. Some nights end at midnight, others whenever the last coin drops. You watch the candle wax drip onto the wooden floorboards, evidence that time is measured by melting tallow as much as any sundial. You realize you've already encountered your first 3 jokes woven in sensory detail along with mainstream facts, fringe tidbits, and scholarly debate. The inn pulses around you alive with sweat smoke and stories. You sip the last dregs of your ale, steel yourself for the rooms above, and brace for the next chapter of this unforgettable and potentially unforgettable night. You duck under a low, sagging timber beam as you step further into the inn, immediately aware that the ceiling is on a first-name basis with gravity. The rough-hewn oak above you swells and contracts with each breath of wind, creaking like an oversized cradle that never quite settled. You brush a knuckle against the beam, feeling wood, softened by centuries of damp. Mainstream fact. Medieval inns were often built with unseasoned timber that warped over time due to moisture and temperature changes. A droplet of water plops onto your shoulder, and you catch a whiff of smoke and old grain. Lanterns hang from iron hooks, sunk into the beams, their glow flickering across thick cobwebs, draped from corner to corner. You tilt your head back and spot spider webs, glistening in the light, some as wide as your palm, proof that insect control was an ambitious notion. Quirky tidbit. You lean away before any 8-legged host mistakes you for a dinner guest. Historians still argue whether innkeepers actively cleaned these webs or simply left them as rustic decor. Open scholarly debate. Either way, seeing a spider the size of a walnut weaving silk above your head isn't the kind of ambience you'd Instagram. Your boots click against the uneven stone floor, and you sense every ridge in the timber shakes as you move, like walking on a medieval trampoline, designed by people who hated comfort. Low beams force you to hunch, and already your neck protests. You mutter a joke under your breath. Ah, yes, perfect posture training courtesy of the 13th century. Air trapped between the floor and ceiling carries the combined aroma of smoke, damp straw, and fermented barley. The walls made of wattle and daub plastered with mud press enclose, leaving only a narrow corridor between tables and the beam-laden ceiling. You notice ancient scorch marks darkening the wood, evidence that lantern accidents and overzealous torches once changed these beams. Mainstream fact. A faint trail of charred wood dust drifts downward, landing on the rough surface of your sleeve. You brush it off, reminding yourself this place has survived more torch mishaps than a pyromaniac's diary. As you edge past a group of grizzled travelers swapping stories, one grunts when you nudge the beam slightly. He tips his hood at you in a gesture that might be an apology or intimidation. You flash joke too. "Sorry, I thought this was a low-beam challenge course." He snorts, returning to his mug. You wonder how many vows he's made about burning this place down only to stay another night for the free entertainment. You reach a wider spot in the room where a massive central beam supports a joinery of rafters overhead. That main beam is carved with initials and crude sketches, hearts, swords, and what might be a poorly drawn dragon quirky tidbit. You trace the marks, imagining generations of guests, each leaving their mark desperate for a legacy in wood. You'd leave your doodle, but you suspect in policy forbade modern graffiti. Your only tools are a muddy boot and a watery ale. A sudden clatter distracts you, a rack of wooden platters tumbles as the rafters groan in protest. You spin, nearly tripping over a plank and steady yourself against a post. The room hushes for a heartbeat, then erupts in laughter as a burly farmer jokes about house special earthquakes. You join in with a sheepish grin, adding joke 3. At least they didn't charge extra for the seismic upgrade. Laughter ripples through the crowd, tension easing as quickly as it arrived. You duck to avoid another low-hanging beam, noticing its angle has shifted since your first pass. You pause and reach up to test its wobble. It quivers like a tuning fork. You push gently and it groans louder, sending a shower of wood dust into the air. You cough and wave it away, half expecting the ceiling to collapse in a dramatic finale. Yet here it clings on defying physics and common sense. Historians still argue whether medieval carpenters intentionally angled beams for drainage, or simply accepted inevitable sagging open scholarly debate. Further along, a row of rough-hewn wooden pegs juts from the beam, each holding a clay lantern. You inspect one, its cracked rim and hardened wax drip suggest it's been in service for decades. You tighten your grip on the lantern's handle, imagining the safety briefing. Don't tilt too far or your eyebrows disappear. You trade a smoother ceiling for no facial singing. Every now and then, a breeze drifts through an arrow-slit window, rattling the beams and whisking away stale air. You close your eyes and inhale, tasting wood smoke and damp earth. You remind yourself that proper ventilation in medieval inns was rare. The same cracks that let air in also let cold drafts and rain fringe accounts. Lamented that rainy nights often left roofs leaking onto guests' shoulders. Quirky tidbit. You pat your cloak, thankful you're not in the worst spot. You step around a sturdy oaken pillar engraved with the inn's name. Its letters are worn smooth by countless travelers brushing past. That central pillar bears the inn's entire weight, supporting creaking rafters that sway in chorus. You rest a hand on it, feeling its solidity beneath a splinter bark. It's the only truly reliable thing in this room. You imagine the pillar's thoughts after centuries of spilled ale, chipped pottery, and drunken dancers. I still stand. You nod in respect. In the corner, an ancient tapestry hangs from a beam once bright with scenes of hunting and feasting, now faded to muddy hues. You lean in, spotting a hare mid-leap beneath a stag's antlers. You trace the embroidery, marveling at the artisans who wove this by candlelight. Historians still debate whether such tapestries serve primarily as insulation or decorative storytelling. Open scholarly debate. In any case, it muffles some of the room's echo. With your head grazing the beam again, you make for the staircase leading upstairs. The steps are narrow and squeak underfoot, revealing gaps between boards. You hesitate at the threshold, assessing the dance required to avoid a concussion. You take a deep breath, duck, and ascend each step a negotiation with gravity and low-hanging joists. At the top, you pause beneath one final beam, its underside, scorched black and cracked from centuries of spilled candle grease. You tap it lightly and feel a hollow reverberation. You can't help but think if this place lasts another 100 years, future travelers will complain about modern architecture's lack of character beams. You grin, brushing off the final embers of soot. You reach the landing knees, creaking as much as the rafters, and look back over the common room below. Lantern light dances off warped beams, casting long shadows that stretch like tired arms. The inn's creaking skeleton feels alive, breathing with the rhythm of every visitor's footsteps. You smile, ready to explore the cramped chambers beyond. Just be sure to bow before ducking under any surprise timbers. You push open the heavy door and step into the inn's common room, where the roar of voices slams into you like a headlong charge of cavalry. Rough wooden benches and tables fill the expanse, worn smooth by centuries of elbows and stained by flagons of ale. In medieval inns, the common room served as both a tavern and meeting place for locals and travelers alike, often doubling as a market hall by day and a raucous social hub by night. Mainstream fact. Tonight, it's a festival of humanity rogues, swapping tall tales, pilgrims reciting prayers under their breath, and merchants haggling over the price of silk and spices. The scent here is a symphony of sensations. Stale ale mingles with the tang of smoked meat. Pungent sweat drifts from a cluster of laborers, and the bite of candle soot clings to every breath. You inhale, then cough, realizing that musty doesn't begin to cover the aroma. You duck a swinging lantern as a tipsy traveler staggers past, nearly taking your ear off. You mutter joke one. Nothing says welcome like secondhand sweat and medieval smoke. The traveler barely registers your presence, too intent on serenading the crowd with an off-key rendition of Greensleeves. A long table at the center groans under the weight of wooden platters heaped with bread cheese, and the occasional roasted fowl leg, though after a few nights on the road, you know not to ask too many questions about provenance. Fringe accounts suggest that some innkeepers set aside unsold meat for the poorest guests, hopefully after a second cleaning. Yet, you're not sure if that's altruism or offloading potentially spoiled goods. Quirky tidbit. You eye the fowl and decide you'll stick to bread for now. Rogues trade knives on a side bench, small sharp blades they claim are in case of highwaymen, though you suspect they mean for highwaymen. Their laughter carries above the crowd like a crow's caw, drawing sidelong glances from a pair of cloaked pilgrims who clutch rosaries and worn hymnals. The pilgrims' eyes flick nervously between the rogues and the nearest exit, as if performing a silent litany. Lead us not into temptation, and not into that table. Historians still argue whether inns facilitated criminal networks by providing safe havens, or actively policed their premises to keep out troublemakers. Open scholarly debate. You tuck that debate away as a reminder that moral high ground is scarce in this room. You navigate through elbow-to-elbow bodies, your cloak brushing sweaty shoulders. A merchant from the east, draped in faded silks, counts his coins under a flickering lantern, his breath puffing like steam in winter. You pause, tempted to sell him your travel-worn cloak for a handful of pennies. You crack joke, too, guaranteed, medieval chic, includes authentic odor. He glances up unimpressed, but tucks a coin into his pouch with a knowing smirk. Overhead, the beams are festooned with bunches of dried herbs, rosemary, thyme, and what might be yarrow strung to perfume the room or ward off pests. You sniff the scents, finding the herbal tang a welcome reprieve from damp straw and sweat. Fringe whispers say that some innkeepers tied red chilies with the herbs, To discourage mice from nibbling stored grain, an early form of pest control, quirky tidbit. You fight the urge to sneeze at the peppery aroma, though a sneeze here could spark a brawl if aimed in the wrong direction. You find a narrow gap between two oak tables and slip into it, planting yourself on a bench, scarred by hundreds of knife cuts and burned-in scorch marks. A group of laborers nearby pounds back flagons of sour ale, their cheeks scarlet and voices booming. You lift your mug, listening for the barkeep's shout before the froth spills over. You steal a sip tart fizzy with a hint of something fermented too long. You mutter joke tree, tastes like barley decided to become vinegar. It's the best medicine for your jitters. As you settle the din shifts, a burly woodsman challenges a slim fencer to a contest of strength, and their hulking arms slap palms amid cheers. You watch as ale dribbles down their gauntleted cuffs. You recall that some inns hosted formal contests, wrestling matches, or archery demonstrations to entertain patrons and draw crowds. Mainstream fact. You lean forward, tempted to wager a few coins on the fencer, though you suspect the odds favor brute force here. At the far end, a minstrel plucks a lute and begins a ballad. The melody is a slow burn, notes wandering through the smoke like lost souls. Yet the crowd's attention is split. Many continue haggling, drinking, or arguing over tavern games like quintain, a target practice contest, suggesting that musical interludes were background noise rather than focal events. Historians still debate whether medieval inn music aimed to soothe travelers or simply filled restless hours. Open scholarly debate. You stare at the minstrel, impressed by his persistence in the face of indifference. A child darts between tables, delivering plates of pottage to hungry mouths. The pottage's steam fogs your vision as you lean in, tempted to try a spoonful. You remember fringe accounts that some innkeepers spice pottage with nettle leaves to bulk up the stew, an attempt to stretch ingredients and pack in nutrients. Quirky tidbit. You decide to wait until you're sure you can stomach both flavor and foliage. The candlelight falters as the flickering lanterns jostle in the shifting crowd. You notice the faces around you, some lined with age, others fresh with youth, each bearing stories you'll never know. A nobleman in travel-worn finery sits apart, surveying the rabble with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. You wonder if he regrets leaving his luxurious manse for this cacophony. You sip your ale, thinking at least they didn't charge him extra for the ambiance. You smile at your quip, basking in the defiance of outsider humor. Footsteps thump on the worn wooden floor as another barmaid weaves through the crowd, balancing a tray of mugs. The mugs clink, spilling amber liquid onto tables and laps. You feel the warmth of spilled ale soaking into the bench beside you and shift away. You sniff the new spill adds a sweet caramel note to the stew of scents oddly pleasant until someone wipes it into your sleeve. You shrug, couturier adaptability. The crowd's energy surges as a dice game erupts into accusations of loaded bones. A burly gambler slams the dice box onto the table, scattering cubes across spilled ale and breadcrumbs. One die rolls off the table, disappearing under a bench. A chorus of groans rises. You stand to retrieve it, dipping your hand into the sticky floor to fish out the rogue bone. You hold it up triumphantly before dropping it into your pocket. You pocket it as a souvenir, musing that future historians might debate its origin. Open scholarly debate, callback. You retreat to your bench as youth brandishes your die-like treasure. He demands a coin for its return, but you've learned the hard way that generosity in inns can be costly. You shake your head and slip away as he pockets the die and grins. You find solace in the bench's familiar dents and scars, history's seating chart. Lanterns dim as the night deepens. The innkeeper signals the last call. You drain your mug and rise, knees popping like creaking rafters. You glance around, catching flashes of sorrowful goodbyes and boisterous farewells. The common room, this maelstrom of humanity, has enveloped you in its heat and habit. You steady yourself against a heavy table, feeling its weight and solidity like an anchor in the sea of chaos. Stepping back through the door you came, you prepare for the climb to the questionable chambers upstairs. You inhale one last lungful of the common room's heady mix, sealing it in memory. You remind yourself tomorrow you'll return for morning chores and pottage, but tonight you've lived the full spectrum of tavern life, laughter, conflict, warmth, and above all, unfiltered human messiness. You ascend the narrow squeaking staircase toward the lodging chambers, each step a negotiation between your clumsy boots and the creaky boards beneath. At the top, a low-beamed corridor stretches before you, lit by wavering candle sconces that cast dancing shadows on rough stone walls. These upstairs rooms, known as hostelers' chambers, were never designed with comfort in mind, but rather to squeeze as many travelers as possible under one roof. Mainstream fact. Your neck protests as you duck under a beam scarred by countless heads before you. The first room you encounter has a chipped wooden door hanging on a single hinge. You push it open and peer inside a claustrophobic space no larger than a broom closet, housing two straw-stuffed mattresses laid directly on the floor. You step in and the door clicks shut behind you. No latch, no bolt, just gravity. A single shuttered window perches high, offering a sliver of moonlight, and a draft that cuts through your cloak like a knife. The mattresses are caked with last season's hay, likely never replaced since the inn's last audit. Fringe accounts recall some innkeepers topped up the straw with moss feathers, or even dried nettles, to mask bedbugs and save on fresh stuffing. Quirky tidbit. You bend to inspect one mattress and recoil as a lone bedbug scuttles from under the straw, its tiny form, a harbinger of nocturnal discomfort. You mutter joke, one I haven't made new friends this quickly since joining a group chat. A small wooden bucket sits in the corner, your designated nighttime latrine. No indoor plumbing here. Instead, travelers relied on buckets or chamber pots, often emptied only once a day, if that is mainstream fact. You peer inside, steeling yourself against the inevitable. You wonder if the innkeeper sends a specialized crew for this duty, or if it's left as some kind of unsavory team-building exercise. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were routinely emptied by staff, or if guests were expected to tiptoe their waist to designated pits outside. Open scholarly debate. You decide you'll sleep standing before testing that theory. Above your head, wooden rafters moan as they settle, and you half expect them to splinter under the weight of history. The low ceiling forces you to stoop, and you feel every vertebra stretch in protest. You shift and nick your scalp on a protruding nail, another notch in the character accommodation belt. You press a hand to your forehead and joke, too, who needs acupuncture when you've got medieval interior design? A single pine board serves as a desk where a traveler's journal once lay. It's now warped and scribbled with faded names: Roland, 1223, Mirabelle, 1247, Anonymous, 1265. You run a finger over the etchings, imagining the hopes and sorrows of those who paused here. You'd add your signature, but your stylus and expensive quill is tucked away in your pack. Plus, carving initials into shared property feels like a social faux pas. Fringe lore suggests daring guests once hid secret love notes beneath floorboards, missives smuggled between strangers on opposite sides of the world. Quirky tidbit. You press your ear to the floor, hoping for a whisper of romance, but only silence greets you. The window shutter rattles as a chill breeze seeps through cracks in the frame. You cross to it, unlatch the wooden bar, and open just enough to peer outside at the moonlit courtyard far below. A wisp of moonlight falls across your boots, illuminating the dust motes spiraling in the air. You inhale the night air, cool, damp, and tinged with distant pipe smoke. You remind yourself that modern windows are overrated. Your eyes adjust to spot a cluster of dark shapes huddled on the far roof. Peacocks escaped from a nearby manor seeking warmth from the tiles. Fringe reports claim some inns offered rooftop roosts for exotic birds to draw noble patrons' quirky tidbit. You stifle a chuckle imagining upscale accommodations in the Middle Ages. Historians still debate whether peacocks were common sights at roadside inns or strictly confined to royal estates, open scholarly debate. Either way, you wouldn't mind trading your bucket for a clucking entourage. You return to your makeshift bed and remove your boots, mindful of what might squirm inside. You kick them lightly, nothing emerges, and tentatively slip off your socks. You gingerly place a foot on the straw mattress and feel the uneven lumps and ridges beneath. You lie back, hair brushing against scattered straw shards. The mattress sighs beneath you, compressing you into a cradle of mild discomfort. You search for blankets but find only a thin woolen throw folded in a corner. You drape it over yourself. It's itchy a bit, moth-eaten, and scented faintly of stale ale. Your nod to medieval aromatherapy. You adjust the blanketing, realizing you'll likely wake shivering or sweating, depending on the nocturnal temperature swing. You sigh and joke, 3. Nothing says, sleep tight, like potential hypothermia or heat stroke. A gentle scuffle from the next chamber hints at neighbors, likely a pair of merchants snoring in duet. The thin walls offer no soundproofing. You'll share every sigh, snore, and curse uttered through the night. You glance toward the door, which might be the flimsiest thing you've ever seen. A light knock from outside accompanies a soft voice. Room for rent. Likely an unlucky traveler seeking a spot for the night. You hope they find the adjacent room not yours. You lie still, back flat against the straw, and let your mind drift. You recall that some inns charged extra for chamber pots and fresh straw premium services only nobles could afford. Mainstream fact. You're glad you're not a noble tonight. The candle's flame trembles from the draft, and you watch its glow shrink before your eyelids close halfway. Despite the bedbugs, the draft, and the squeaking floorboards, you find a perverse comfort in the shared misery of medieval lodging. You're part of a centuries-old lineage of weary travelers, collapsing in these cramped quarters. You close your eyes, imagining those etchings on the desk, lighting to life. Their faded letters, glowing in the darkness. You survived this too. You exhale and surrender to the promise of restless sleep. You wake to the sound of pots clanging below, and your stomach reminds you that medieval inns didn't exactly boast. Gourmet kitchens more like survival cafeterias with bells. You shuffle down the stairs into the common room, following the aroma of simmering pottage that clings to the air like an unwelcome guest. A long, scarred serving table bears wooden bowls, heaped with thick, grayish stew. Pottage, the medieval staple made by boiling vegetables. Grains and scraps of meat in one giant cauldron. Mainstream fact. You grip a chipped bowl and eye the contents warily as the cook ladles out portions. The pottage's consistency is closer to wallpaper paste than soup, gloopy, grainy, and suspiciously lumpy. You peek at the floating bits, turnips, barley, and what you pray is beef fat rather than, say, shoe leather. You take a tentative spoonful and taste the subtle undertone of sour ale, used as a liquid base. Fringe accounts suggest this trick masked rancid broth on bad days, quirky tidbit. You swallow, realizing that your gag reflex is on a temporary vacation. You find a bench near the hearth and settle the bowl, warming your palms. Each mouthful tastes of earthy root vegetables and overcooked grains with faint echoes of smoky embers. You remember that inns ration food based on guest status. Nobles might see quail or fresh fish, while common travelers scrape by on pottage and hard cheese. Mainstream fact. You glance at the oily cheese wedge next to your bowl and decide a nibble is bravery you're not feeling. A group of merchants nearby passes around a loaf of stale rye bread. You tear off a chunk, noting the crust's toughness could double as armor plating. You dunk it in the pottage, softening the edges, then take a bite. Your teeth protest, but you manage. You summon joke one, I've had softer landings off trampoline parks. The merchants barely glance up. They've likely done this dance for every mealtime since birth. Between bites, you overhear travelers debating the pottage's ingredients. One claims it's all turnip and water. Another insists there's a hidden smoky ham bone in there somewhere. Historians still argue whether medieval pottage was a gourmet canvas for creative cooks, or simply a means to avoid wasting scraps. Open scholarly debate. You lean closer, spoon poised, hoping for a definitive clue, and maybe a meaty morsel to prove them right. You sip from a communal wooden mug of ale, provided with your meal. Unlike the sour ale you tasted earlier, this one is darker and thicker with sweet barley notes and a hint of caramel. Mead is offered to a select few at premium inns, but here ale is the communal drink of choice. Mainstream fact. You lift the mug and sniff appreciatively. Still not champagne, but certainly an upgrade from yesterday's swill. You crack joke too. This tastes like happiness with a barley filter. A barmaid weaves between tables, carrying a platter of hard cheese. You watch her carefully carve wedges with a knife, so blunt it might be ceremonial. The cheese is crumbly salt-cured and smells like old socks. Yet in your circumstance, a salty bite feels luxurious. Fringe whispers suggest some innkeepers added ash to cheese rinds to improve preservation and deter rodents. Quirky tidbit. You nibble on a piece detecting a faint mineral tang, then nod appreciatively. Foodie culture, circa 1300. As you eat, a burly woodsman across the hearth raps his spoon on the table to call for more pottage. The cook hoists the ladle and fills the woodsman's bowl to the brim. You wonder if there's an unspoken hierarchy in queue jumping for seconds and suspect it's survival of the loudest. You realize your meek tapping goes unnoticed, but you manage to eventually catch the cook's eye and secure a refill. You whisper joke 3 loud and proud, or you'll be hungry till dawn. The hearth's heat warms your back, fighting off the drafts that seep through the stone walls. You recall that inns often lack chimneys. Smoke escaped through roof vents, leaving kitchens smoky and common rooms chilly. Mainstream fact. You appreciate the hearth's warmth more than ever, recognizing that each spoonful of pottage doubles as thermal gear and meal. Curious, you dip your spoon deeper, stirring the bowl to unearth hidden surprises. A strand of meat appears, a tough tendon, but meat nonetheless. You chew thoughtfully, savoring the novelty of protein. Nearby, a child scoops up a chunk and grins, posting a quick thumbs up across the table. You wing back, social media medieval style. You reflect that meat distribution was a prize commodity sparingly dished out to inflate satisfaction. Open scholarly debate. Callback. You finish the last slurp, your bowl is nearly clean, and slide it into a pile for washing. A server snatches it deftly. No tip is required for this service. You pat your belly, surprised at how filling one bowl of pottage could be. As you stand, the cook nudges a small plate of pickled onions toward you, a palate cleanser of sorts. You crunch one, the sharp tang brightening your senses. You marvel that something so tiny could pack such a punch. You step away from the table, ready to scout the bar for more ale. or perhaps a slice of honeyed cake. Reserved for special occasions at some establishments. Fringe tidbit callback. You note that menus could vary wildly. Some offered fresh fruit only when in season, and others imported spices at exorbitant costs. Mainstream fact. You wonder whether tomorrow's breakfast will bring porridge or yet another round of pottage. You shrug, realizing that in a medieval inn, every meal is a gamble. Clutching your empty bowl and ale mug, you navigate back through the common room's haze toward the staircase leading upstairs. The lingering warmth in your hands and belly is your greatest takeaway from this meal. You exhale, anticipating the next chapter of smells, sounds, and surprises that await in these storied walls. You wander back into the common room, senses sharpened by pottage and pickled onions, and make a beeline for the ale barrels rattling behind the bar. The heady scent of fermented grain beacons like a siren's call. Mainstream fact. Medieval inns typically brewed their ale, often in large wooden vats earlier that day, then stored it in barrels for easy tap access. Your fingers brush the cool damp wood as you lift a leather-wrapped mug, eager for the first frothy swig. The barkeep turns the tap with a practiced flick, and the mug fills with cloudy amber liquid, crowned by a thick head of foam. You sniff, catching notes of sweet malt and a fleeting hint of overripe apples. You raise the mug and inhale again. Ale, in the medieval period, often carried subtle orchard flavors from airborne yeasts. Quirky tidbit. You tip the mug to your lips and tilt back a deep gulp. The liquid hits your palate like a warm thunderclap, smooth, barely dancing across your tongue, before sliding down your throat in a comforting blaze. You settle onto a nearby stool, pressed against a weathered ash beam, mug in hand, savoring the warmth radiating from the ale. The common room hums with conversation and clatter, but here at the bar you catch snippets. A traveling knight debating which inn offers the best brew, a group of peasants arguing if this year's crop produced better barley than last. Historians still argue whether medieval ale was primarily a hydration source, often safer than water, or simply a way to make daily bread more interesting. Open scholarly debate. You take another sip, convinced it's a bit of both. As you drink, you notice a small tapered jug of mead perched on a shelf beside the bar, a honey-based wine, popular among nobles and occasional travelers. Mainstream fact. The mead's color glows like molten gold in the lantern light, and its bottle is sealed with royal blue wax. You catch a glimmer of regret from a cloaked merchant as he eyes the jug, calculating whether to splurge. Fringe whispers say that some taverns diluted mead with water and resin to stretch precious honey reserves, compromising sweetness for volume. Quirky tidbit. You ponder ordering a small pour, but decide to test the ale's depth first. Back at your stool, you tilt the mug, watching the foam settle. Then whip out a piece of stale bread to trap errant drips, a makeshift drip catcher. You tilt back for another swallow and grin as the final gulp warms your chest. You murmur, joke one. My ancestors survived plagues. I'm just here to survive the hangover. The barkeep glances up, offering a knowing nod, before sliding another ale-filled mug within reach. You lean forward, resting elbows on the bar, and catch a glimpse of the brew's sediment swirling in the mug's bottom. This unfiltered ale is laden with yeast particles, an earthy reminder of its raw craft. Mainstream fact. You swirl the remaining liquid and trace barren islands of sediment, then whisk your tongue across the surface, teasing out honeyed undertones. You think this is what medieval luxury tastes like. Eyeing the mead jug again, you muster the courage to ask for a small horn's worth. Mead was often served in drinking horns or small goblets when available. The barkeep pours a measure, hands it over with a flourish, and you cradle the goblet like a precious artifact. You sniff its golden depth and taste a drop. It's lavishly sweet, floral, and smooth, lingering on your tongue like a whispered secret. You crack joke, too, liquid sunshine in a horn. You alternate between ale and mead, noting how each drink shifts your mood. Ale fortifies and steadies you, while mead loosens your shoulders and loosens laughter. A nearby minstrel eavesdropping pluck a bright chord on his lute, and you toast him in return. He grins and begins a jaunty tune, adding to the evening's cacophony. You settle into the rhythm, wobbling only slightly on the stool. Between swigs, you overhear two guild inspectors at the far end clipboard, in hand scrawling notes as they sample mug after mug, likely ensuring the inn's measures and quality match local regulations. Mainstream fact. One inspector frowns, scribbles something, and then nods approvingly at the third barrel. Historians still debate whether such inspections improved brew standards or simply provided opportunities for graft and bribes. Open scholarly debate. You lean in, offering a conspiratorial wink and an extra ale mug. Even the inspectors can't resist. As the night deepens, mug after goblet clinks, and you feel the room's warmth seep into your bones. The lamplight bounces off frosty rims, reflecting in your eyes like twinkling stars. You take a final gulp of mead honey sweetness, swarming your senses, and idly wonder if tomorrow's headache will be worth tonight's delight. You raise your mug to the barkeep with a sincere smile, gratitude for liquid solace in stone walls. You shift off the stool, deciding it's time to explore more of the inn's secrets, or perhaps return to those questionable chambers above. With newfound courage, you tuck the empty horn and mug onto a shelf, nod at the barkeep, and wobble toward the common room, laughter bubbling up as the evening's merriment carries you onward into another unforgettable medieval moment. You weave through the thronging common room, ale's warmth still humming in your veins, until you spot the dreaded bucket tucked beneath a raftered overhang, a grim reminder that medieval inns had zero tolerance for indoor plumbing. Mainstream fact. You swallow, pausing to steel yourself against the inevitable. Your heart hammers like a smith's hammer, striking anvil metal as you approach the chamber pot's grim fate. One misstep here, and you'll be baptizing some poor soul's cloak in the most unsavory baptism imaginable. Taking a deep breath, you wrap both hands around the bucket's rim. The edge is encrusted with hardened sludge from last night's overflow, and you wince at the acrid tang rising from within. Fringed tales claim some cheeky innkeepers secretly sprinkled powdered lavender into the refuse to mask the stench, though whether that was hospitality or witchcraft is anyone's guess. Quirky tidbit. You fight the urge to gag, settling instead for a tight-lipped grimace and joke. Nothing says five-star service like personal onboard waste management. Historians still argue whether chamber pots were routinely emptied multiple times per day or simply left until they burst. Either way, the resulting ambiance was unforgettable. Open, scholarly debate. You hug the bucket, close arms, trembling as you pivot toward a curtained alcove at the room's edge. Shadowed and cramped, it offers the slightest hint of privacy, an oasis of discretion in this rowdy tavern. Inside the curtained cubby, you lower yourself onto a built-in bench, a precarious plank hovering inches above the stone floor. The bucket sits on a narrow shelf carved into the wall, its placement practically daring you to reconsider. You settle knees, knocking against the ragged curtain, and do your business in record time, every second a tightrope walk between relief and embarrassment. You remind yourself the faster you go, the less opportunity for accidental spectacle. Finishing, you reach for the scrap of cloth in your pocket, your only bidet alternative, and dab, cautiously ducking under the low beam to avoid a splatter fiasco. You stand bones creaking like the inn's floorboards and regard the bucket with mixed gratitude and horror. Clearing your throat, you decide whether to attempt a splash of water from a communal basin or embrace the grime as a medieval badge of honor. You opt for the latter. Cleanliness is overrated, and your rumpled tunic can handle one more stain. Exiting the cubby, you jostle a line of rudimentary cleaning tools. A bristle brush stiff with caked muck, an overturned pot half filled with yesterday's solution, and a drape of coarse cloth hanging to dry. A fly buzzes circles around your head, nature's rude host, prompting joke to buzz off, I'm fresh out of fly swatters. You wave it away, feeling the stares of curious onlookers through the thin curtain. Clutching the bucket, you step into the light of the common room. Travel-weary patrons blanch at the sight, shuffling aside as you approach the door. A burly gong farmer stands under a torch's glow, one of the rare souls trained to haul away medieval waste, mainstream fact. His leather apron silhouette is half angel, half apocalyptic janitor. You offer the bucket with trembling hands. He grips it with the seasoned detachment of a veteran and hoists it onto his shoulder. Joke 3 pulses in your mind. Congratulations, you've just leveled up in gross-out challenges. He strides toward the door, the bucket sloshing ominously as it swings. The common room's heat recedes, replaced by the clang of the gong farmer's boots on the stone threshold. A hush falls, broken only by the soft drip of condensation from the bucket's rim. You exhale, releasing weeks' worth of medieval anxiety in a single breath. Returning to your bench, you wipe your hands on your tunic, one small concession to hygiene. The barkeep catches your eye, offering a discreet thumbs up, as though sharing in your small victory. Around you, laughter and clinking mugs resume the common room's chaotic pulse, undimmed by your absence. You settle back, fitting into the bench's familiar curve, your heart still racing. Later, you catch yourself glancing at the corner where the bucket used to sit, an empty stage awaiting its next performer. You feel strangely proud you survived medieval sanitation, and that counts for something in this unforgiving world. As you cradle your next mug of ale, you remind yourself that every hardship here is part of the story, one more row in the tapestry of life. You slip away from the messy chamber pot aftermath and drift toward the hearth, where roaring flames leap like mythical beasts hungry for stories. The hearthside is the inn's true center, a glowing heart that draws every weary soul for warmth and companionship. Mainstream fact medieval inns relied on a central open hearth, rather than individual fireplaces concentrating heat and light for communal gathering. You settle onto a rough-hewn bench close enough to feel the embers' glow kiss your face, the crackling fire sending sparks skyward into the soot-black rafters. Around you, minstrels and travelers circle like moths to a flame, swapping tales embroidered with bravado and laughter. A scarred old sailor leans forward, voice gravelly, as the dried seabed, recounting a narwhal hunt so exaggerated you suspect he invented half the beast's horn's quirky tidbit. His audience hangs on every word, mugs poised mid-toast. You raise your own ale and joke one. If that whale was any bigger, I'd need a carver instead of a carving knife. Across the hearth, a troubadour plucks a lute chord, setting the rhythm for a bawdy sea shanty that ebbs and flows through the room like a tide of song. His fingers dance along the strings, though occasionally missing a note. You wince and whisper, joke too. At least my karaoke mic never eats the chorus. Yet the crowd cheers, stamping feet and slapping thighs as though this off-key serenade is the seventh wonder of the world. Near the embers, a group of merchants swaps adventurous anecdotes, camel caravans lost in dunes, silk thieves outwitted by cunning spies, and the time one stallion outran an entire battalion. Historians still argue whether these tales served as genuine news exchanges or merely entertainment to pass the long night's open scholarly debate. You lean in, catching glimpses of sincerity beneath the hyperbole, and sip your ale each swallow, punctuating a collective gasp or cheer. A pair of traveling monks share a more sober tale. A miraculous healing at a distant abbey. Their soft voices offer a contrast to the raucous laughter, adding a hush that ripples across the benches. You settle back listening as they describe cured blindness and divine ambrosia, and can't help but feel a flicker of reverence. Fringe whispers suggest some monk storytellers gained fame by tailoring miracles to fit the innkeeper's preferred saint performance art. Or piety, you decide the truth lies somewhere in between quirky tidbit. You murmur joke 3, I'll believe it when I see a banana split in half. Meanwhile, a boisterous woodcutter at your elbow pounds his mug on the bench calling for his own tall tale. He boasts of wrestling a boar larger than a cartwheel and emerging triumphant with only a few torn trousers. One listener, an ex-soldier with a missing ear, puffs a pipe, nods gravely, then declares the tale plausible, if the boar was distracted by moonshine fumes. The debate kindles fresh warmth beside the fire as laughter and mock arguments echo like rolling thunder. Amid the human chorus, the fire itself becomes a storyteller. Logs hiss and pop, releasing a fragrant smoke that drifts upward in lacy spirals. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the heat soothe aching muscles, and the smoke blur the edges of reality. Remember that time you nearly dozed off in Section 1's Grand Hall. This is medieval ASMR just with more charred wood and fewer disclaimers. A traveling jester leaps into the circle, juggling carved apples and balancing on a single foot. Each catch and tumble elicits shrieks of delight. Children giggle and grown men slap their knees. You admire his nimbleness, considering that few pleasures match watching a clown defy gravity and dignity simultaneously. Fringe lore holds that some jesters doubled as secret informants gathering gossip under the guise of comedy. Quirky tidbit. You squint eyeing him suspiciously, but finally decide his only secret is how to avoid bruising his derriere. As the night deepens, the storyteller's wheel turns from tall tales to whispered confessions, lost loves, secret deals, and regrets that taste as bitter as dregs of ale. A woman in travel-worn robes admits she carried a locket stolen from a noble's daughter. A merchant confesses to bribing customs officials for safe passage. Historians still debate whether tavern confessionals served as genuine moral reckoning or merely fodder for blackmailers' open scholarly debate. You sit forward, heart pounding, imagining the ripple effects if those revelations ever reached daylight. The flames gutter around the edges, waning beneath a fresh heap of logs. You stand and toss a branch onto the hearth. The fire roars back to life like an ancient beast fed. You watch the orange tongues lick upward, then turn back to the circle. Faces aglow, eyes bright, each person transformed by the fire's magic into a keeper of stories. You pat the bench content to be part of this timeless ritual. Travelers converging in a smoky room, forging bonds through laughter song and shared warmth. You lean back, raising your mug in a silent salute to the hearth's flickering light, knowing that no castle or manor can match the inn's unpredictable charm. As the last log crackles, you slip away, heart light and mind buzzing, ready to trace the smoky trail to the next chapter of inn life. Dice games, clandestine tunnels, or the lure of morning chores at dawn. You inhale the fire's embers lingering in the air, tuck a smidge of smoke into your cloak pocket for tomorrow, and step back into the bustling common room with a final grin. You sidle up to a battered oak table, scarred by score lines and sweat stains, where a row of rough-hewn dice clatter in the palm of a grizzled gambler. The inn's dice games are legend mainstream fact medieval taverns, often hosted games of hazard, including dice, to entertain patrons and turn a profit through house rules. Tonight, you're about to witness fortunes made and broken over a single throw. A motley crew of players surrounds the table. A sharp-eyed merchant who mutters prayers to Fortuna before each toss, a lanky journeyman eager to prove his luck, and a broad-shouldered mercenary who cracks his knuckles in place of a poker face. The dealer sweeps the dice, a set of bone cubes etched with tiny pips, into a wooden bowl, then dumps them onto the table with theatrical flair. You inhale the musty scent of aged wood and ale, warm leather heart thumping like a drum. The first roll skitters across the grain, bouncing unpredictably. Before settling on snake eyes, the merchant curses under his breath, clutching his emptied purse. Fringe whispers suggest some innkeepers once rigged tables with subtly weighted dice to guarantee the house always wins, though discerning eyes might spot the irregular pips if they dared quirky tidbit. You lean in, eyes narrowing as the journeyman flicks the dice again. Historians still argue whether medieval dice games were considered fair entertainment or criminal enterprises, given their association with gambling and occasional brawls. Open scholarly debate. You watch as the mercenary places a hefty pouch of coins on the table, backing his bravado with silver, and narrows his gaze at his opponents. You mutter joke one when they said, "Roll the dice." I didn't know they meant on my life savings. The journeyman tosses snake eyes again, this time intentionally, an obvious sign he's loaded the dice or learned sleight of hand. The crowd erupts, cheers, boos, and a handful of spilled mugs. The merchant leaps up, face red, accusing the young man of trickery. The mercenary rises too, hand drifting toward his dagger hilt. Tension crackles across the room like static. A bystander stands to break things up, but the merchant shoves him away, and the mercenary swings an arm, grazing the merchant's shoulder with a backhand. A sharp crack echoes as the two men collide, and suddenly benches are overturned, mugs fly, and the entire common room erupts into chaos. You duck behind a barrel, heart racing, and whisper, "Joke two. Who needs gladiators when you have, in drama, fists fly?" Amid a haze of smoke and spilled ale, a baker's apprentice hurls a pie plate like a frisbee, landing a direct hit on the mercenary's shoulder. He roars, drops to one knee, then leaps back up, swinging wildly. Someone shouts for the innkeeper, who emerges brandishing a hefty cudgel. Mainstream fact tavern keepers often arm themselves to maintain order and protect their property. He dispatches one brawler with a swift strike, sending the journeyman sprawling into a stack of barrels. You seize the moment to slip around the melee, scooping up your tankard from the floor. You navigate through swaying bodies and flailing limbs each step, a gamble almost as nerve-wracking as the dice. You crack joke 3 under your breath. Best night out, ever bring a helmet and elbow pads. You wink at a passing musician whose lute has been repurposed as a makeshift splint for a downed reveler. Gradually, the innkeeper and a couple of burly patrons restore order, hauling the combatants to opposite corners. The merchant rubs his injured shoulder, glaring at the journeyman, whose smug grin suggests victory enough. Dice lie scattered across the floor, some missing pips, some coated in ale and blood. The innkeeper snatches them, grinding them under his boot. "No more games tonight," he bellows, voice echoing off the rafters. A hush falls, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the drip of spilled ale. Candles flicker uncertainly as patrons catch their breath. You watch the innkeeper pour a measure of strong brandy into a tin cup and hand it to the shaken merchant, who downs it in one gulp, fire trailing down his throat. Historians still debate whether brandy was commonly available in roadside inns. or reserved for wealthy travelers open scholarly debate. Either way, it seems to fix his mood. The mercenary retrieves his coins. Some lost, some recovered, and tucks them away with a grunt of satisfaction. The journeyman pockets a couple of silver pennies left behind, then offers a curt nod to the merchant, an unspoken truce earned by his cunning. You lean back, exhaling a shaky breath, and watch as the crowd disperses, returning to benches and mugs, as though the fight never happened. You wipe sweat from your brow, pick up your tankard, and take a cautious sip. Ale now tastes like victory. You glance at the cleared table, imagining the next wave of gamblers eyeing it with eager anticipation. You catch the innkeeper's eye. He nods in your direction, acknowledging both your survival and your discretion for steering clear of the fray. As the common room's rhythm settles back into drunken conversation and low music, you stretch cramped limbs and flex your fingers, thankful they're still intact. You weave through the last lingering scuffles and reclaim your seat by the hearth, your heart still pounding with the adrenaline of dice and dares. You can't help but admire the raw, unpredictable pulse of medieval inn life, where fortune and fists collide with equal abandon. You lift your tankard in a silent toast to the fallen dice, the quick fists, and the wisdom of watching from a distance. You remind yourself that tomorrow's dawn brings chores, pottage, and maybe a new day's dice game if the table survives. You settle back, the hearth's glow comforting your frayed nerves, ready for whatever surprises this storied inn reveals next. You're nursing your ale by the hearth when a sudden hush ripples through the common room, a ripple that soon crashes into a wave of stern faces and polished armor. Guild inspectors and local authority figures have arrived. Their arrival, sounding like a gong announcing inspection day. Mainstream fact, medieval inns, especially those on trade routes, were subject to periodic visits from guild officials and town magistrates to ensure proper licensing, fair pricing, and cleanliness standards. Tonight, you're about to witness enforcement in action. Two guild inspectors' robes emblazoned with crossed keys. Astride is flanked by a pair of town watchmen carrying lanterns that betray every speck of dust on the floor. The lead inspector's gaze is razor-sharp, sweeping the benches and barrels as though he can read misdemeanors in the wood grain. Fringe accounts suggest some inns paid bribes to schedule inspections during their quietest hours, ensuring a spotless record, though whether that's corruption or cunning is left to interpretation. Quirky tidbit. You lean back, ale mug at the ready, preparing for a masterclass in medieval bureaucracy. The inspector calls for the innkeeper, who emerges from the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on his stained apron. He bows stiffly forehead, nearly brushing the low beam. You sympathize. Nobody wants to face regulators after a night of spilled ale and dice dust. The inspector's parchment scroll creaks as he unrolls it, inked with statutes and fees. He scans the room, reciting a checklist license displayed. Weights and measures accurate. Is firewood properly stored? You wince as he notes your empty tankard, leaning against the hearth, a small oversight in his ledger of infractions. As the inspector approaches your bench, you pretend to be deeply engaged in conversation, though your ears burn with dread. He stops beside you, examining the ale mug with a critical eye. You clear your throat and joke quietly, "I assure you, sir, that's just a relic." Round-the-clock service. He flicks his eyes toward the mug's interior, inspects the sediment lining the bottom, and marks another tick in his book. You risk a furtive sip, just enough to appear compliant. Meanwhile, the watchmen check each barrel, weighing them on a sturdy scale that creaks under the load. They roll out a cart of wooden measures and dip each barrel, ensuring that a tankard equals the standard unit. Historians still argue whether these measures were more about fairness or revenue. After all, extra pennies per measure added up quickly open scholarly debate. You swallow a nervous gulp as they test the ale's volume and slide another note into their margin. The inspector then moves to the serving table, gingerly prodding the pottage cauldron's lid with a gloved finger. He peers inside, sniffs, and jots an observation that you suspect reads gruel too lumpy. He calls for the cook, who scuttles forward, bearing a battered pot and a dubious expression. The inspector demands proof of meat content, no hidden turnips only, and the cook plunges a spoon into the stew, offering a sample. The inspector tastes it, nods once, then scribbles again. You lean in, craving that authoritative nod, though your spoon remains empty. As the inspection continues, a merchant steps forward, complaining about an overcharge at the ale tap earlier. The inspector listens, nodding gravely, then summons the barkeep. You observe as the inspector cross-references the complaint with his ledger, eyeing the ale's price list, nailed to the beam. Fringe tales hold that some inns used hidden price lists to exploit travelers ignorant of local currency values. An old scam in every age, quirky tidbit. The barkeep sputters an apology and agrees to refund the overcharged groat, eliciting a round of applause from onlookers. A hush settles as the inspector's gaze falls upon the common room's rafters, specifically the haphazardly strung bundles of herbs and peppers. He frowns, noting in his book the need for better pest control, or at least safer storage. You recall that those herbs once masked the stench of stale ale, not rats, and you wonder if the inspector's standards extend to culinary aroma, or simply public health. Historians still debate whether medieval health codes prioritize smell over sanitation. Given the era's miasma theory of disease, open scholarly debate, the inspector finally reaches the door to the lodging chambers. He instructs the innkeeper to present room keys and master lanterns. A young page scurries to fetch them, lantern in hand. You catch a glimpse of the inspector's face as he steps under the low beams upstairs, an expression that suggests he's already practiced ducking for impact. You stifle a sympathetic grin. Minutes pass in silence, punctuated by the inspector's occasional cough or grunt of disapproval. Back on the ground floor, the guild official calls for the innkeeper's books. A battered ledger scribbled with nightly receipts and tax notes. As the innkeeper hands it over, he presses a small sack of silver into the inspector's glove palm. Either a fee or a bribe, you can't be sure. The inspector thumbs through the pages, nodding as he confirms the payment of dues. You consider that liquidity may smooth inspection more swiftly than any ale can. Finally, the inspector emerges, parchment rolled and pen capped. He addresses the innkeeper in a booming voice. Your establishment passes muster with minor penalties for ale quantity and pottage quality. Ensure corrections by next fortnight or face fines. The innkeeper bows deeply, relief flooding his features. You exhale, feeling the tension in the room. Relax. Patrons resume their seats, and mugs refill with newfound vigor. You catch the inspector's eye as he prepares to leave. You offer a respectful nod, and he returns a curt tip of his hood approval, enough for your confidence. You relish the triumphant flutter in your chest. Surviving the guild's scrutiny is rarer than winning at dice. As the lantern light bubbles down the corridor, you murmur, Joke 3. Nothing like a dose of bureaucracy to spice up your night. The common room erupts in applause, not for the inspector, but for the barkeep's survival. You settle back onto your bench mug, raised in salute. To order restored and rules enforced. The inn's pulse resumes its chaotic rhythm, hearty laughter, clinking tankards, and the distant promise of tomorrow's chores. You sip your ale with renewed appreciation, knowing that for now the inn has passed inspection, and so have you. The inn falls into a lull as the bells of midnight toll. but sleep remains elusive. You retreat upstairs to your cramped chamber, only to be greeted by a cacophony of nocturnal neighbors, betraying the promise of rest. A guttural snore erupts from the adjacent room, rattling the thin walls like a sudden clash of cymbals. In medieval inns, rooms, shared walls, thinner than a knight's gauntlet, offering little insulation against sound or scent. Mainstream fact. You press an ear to the wall, half expecting to hear snatches of dreams tonight. It's more like a woodland symphony of snores, coughs, and frustrated sighs. You lie on your straw mattress every spring of the embedded ticks, recalling the chamber's inaugural inhabitants. Across the hall, a traveler's muffled argument with a bedbug-fueled scratch suggests the critters are as restless as you are. Fringe accounts claim some guests smeared themselves in wild onion juice to deter pests, though whether that cured bites or just added insult to injury remains debated. Quirky tidbit. You sniff your sleeve, glad you opted for damp blankets over onion cologne. Your snore, if you dare call it that, echoes in your ears, prompting you to shift position. Each movement sends straw shards stabbing into your back as though the bed itself is punishing you for daring to sleep. You murmur, joke one. Nothing says luxury like agricultural byproducts beneath your spine. The mattress sighs under you its lumps and dips, forming an uneven topography that defies any chance of sleep posture. Below, footsteps pattern as a night clerk makes rounds rattling keys and checking for lost souls. In medieval inns, a beadle or steward often patrolled at night to enforce curfews and quell disturbances. Mainstream fact. You hear a soft knock on a distant door, perhaps another hapless guest seeking parley for peace. And the clerk's low voice murmurs, "Back to bed, friend." The scuffle of boots receding offers a momentary lull. Yet peace is fleeting. Somewhere in the rafters, rats, drawn by crumbs and warmth, scurry in search of midnight morsels. You brace yourself as tiny claws scratch overhead, imagining the ceiling collapsing under their abrasive parade. You whisper, joke too, at least they're polite enough to announce themselves. The rodent's footsteps fade, replaced by a dripping sound. Water leaking through the thatch roof onto the stone floor below. You hold your breath listening to droplets plink against wood. Potential surprises awaiting the unwary. Your bladder protests from all that ale. But the thought of venturing downstairs to the communal bucket reignites your earlier trauma. You weigh discomfort against humiliation, ultimately deciding to endure. You roll out of bed socks, snagging on stray straw, and stumble down the corridor, head grazing low beams. In the flicker of a lone lantern outside your door, you catch sight of your reflection. Pale hair, matted eyes, rimmed red. You wink at yourself and joke. 3. The glamorous life of a medieval traveler. Navigating the corridor's twists, you pass other chambers. One door yawns open, revealing a fellow guest, dozing in a heap of blankets, snoring like a wounded boar. You step over a discarded tunic, pray it's its owner, and press on. The stairs await a narrow descent that promises both relief and fresh perils. You grip the railing, an ancient timber, worn smooth by 1,000 hands. An inch downward, each creak announcing your presence to the slumbering. Back in the common room, the chamber pot's corner now stands silent. You approach with caution, lift the lid, and empty your burden with swift efficiency. The bouquet's steward, perhaps a stable boy, moonlighting, glances over, nods sympathetically, and returns to his duties. You feel a surge of triumph. The bucket conquered your dignity, mostly intact. As you climb back up, the floorboards groan underfoot, and you swear you hear laughter, either your own or the ghosts of past insults. You slip into bed, drawing the thin blanket up to your chin. Outside, the wind rattles shutters, and the hearth's embers fade to smoldering coals. At last, the world seems to hush around you. You cradle your pillow, 2 pieces of folded cloth, and press your cheek against the scratchy fabric. The room glows faintly with moonlight, pooling through the window's gaps, casting ghostly shapes on the floor. You close your eyes, mind buzzing with the night's dramas, bawdy songs, dice fights, guild inspections, and now this final trek for relief. Your breathing slows as fatigue overtakes you. The smells of old wood and stale ale settle like a cradle lullaby. You drift between wakefulness and dreams, your heart still echoing the common room's rhythm. In the half-dark, you remember historians still debate whether nightly rounds in inns deterred crime or simply disturbed the innocent open scholarly debate. You decide it doesn't matter tonight, disturbance has become the norm. As sleep claims you, the last thought is gratitude for surviving another night of shared walls, bucket-borne indignities and rodent audiences. You nestle into the straw embrace, allowing the chamber's groans and creaks to sing you into slumber. You jerk awake to a cacophony, roosters crowing like alarm clocks set by the apocalypse church bells, tolling with relentless insistence, and the innkeeper's bellowing summons echoing down the corridor. Medieval inns often catered to early-rising travelers and local rhythms, using roosters and bells as natural wake-up calls. Mainstream fact. You squint through stiff eyelids, disoriented as stray shafts of dawn. Light pierced the shutter gaps, and spotlight swirling motes of dust above your straw-strewn pallet. Your head throbs with the remnants of last night's ale and mead, and your stomach growls in protest at the prospect of morning chores before breakfast. You swing your legs over the edge of the bedstraw crackling beneath you, and stand rubbing your temples against a low wooden beam. You crack a joke under your breath. Who needs coffee when you have poultry percussion? Dragging your boots on over cold feet, you slip out of the room and down the narrow stairs. The corridor is already alive. Pages scurry with torches, servants stumble in pairs carrying buckets of water, and a bleary-eyed stable hand shoves a reluctant donkey toward the courtyard. You navigate blonde straws and leftover ale puddles, careful not to faceplant into a welcome mat of grime. In the courtyard, the sun peeks over tiled roofs, casting long shadows across the ruts and puddles. Roosters strut by in triumphant territory patrol, kicking up mud as they crow. You approach a wooden trough where fresh water has been drawn. Mainstream fact inns typically provide water for guests to wash and animals to drink at dawn. You scoop handfuls and splash your face, wincing at the icy sting, but grateful for the wake-up call. You attempt joke 2. At least my face knows it's morning. The innkeeper stands on a barrel clipboard in hand, barking orders. Milking, first, stables, next breakfast on the hour. His voice carries authority, born of necessity. You join the motley crew of travelers and staff tasked with dawn chores, fetching milk from the inn's small goat herd, mucking donkeys and sweeping the courtyard. You grab a bucket and head to the goat pen, where a half-dozen bleary-eyed goats await milking. Each tug from the teats sends a spray of cool milk into the pail, and you note the surprisingly sweet scent, French tidbit. Some inns flavored morning porridge with fresh goat's milk for a touch of luxury, quirky tidbit. While milking, you overhear a heated debate between the cook and a merchant over porridge, consistency history's earliest food critique. Historians still argue whether medieval porridge was served thin for hydration or thick for sustenance. Open scholarly debate. You decide neither matters until you taste it, so you finish milking, wipe your hands on your tunic, and carry the pail toward the kitchen. Next, you're handed a pitchfork to clear straw and manure from the donkey stalls, an olfactory challenge that tests your resolve. Each shovelful winds its way into a wheelbarrow destined for the fields. You hoist the load with the grunt muscles, complaining that they prefer beheading lords to move dung. You mutter joke 3, I wanted a spa retreat, not a permagreen facial. By the time chores conclude, sweat beads on your brow despite the crisp morning air. The cook calls everyone into the common room for breakfast service. The promise of pottage and stale bread fueling your limp steps. You return your tools to a leaning rack, pitchforks and brooms, standing at attention and march inside. Back in the common room, the hearth has been stoked with fresh logs, flames, dancing against sooty walls. A long table now bears wooden platters of breakfast porridge, bowls of hard cheese, and mugs of ale, and watered wine, a medieval morning buffet, mainstream fact. You take your place among other yawning guests, eyeing the steaming porridge with both dread and anticipation. You dip a wooden spoon into the thick gruel, more buttery oats than vegetables this time, and blow across the surface before tasting. The flavor is bland but warm, soothing your rumbling stomach. You tear off a chunk of rye bread dunket and chew thoughtfully, noting that breakfast in medieval inns provided caloric kickstarts essential for day-long travel or labor. As you eat, the inn fills with the scent of fresh stew and the clatter of spoons. Windows open to let in fresh air, wafting the aroma of dew-soaked fields and wood smoke. You breathe deeply, feeling morning's promise seep into your bones. The early light reveals splashes of color on the worn tapestries, rich reds and blues, faded to dusty hues, yet still holding tales of banquet halls and noble feasts. You notice fellow travelers for the first time in clear daylight. A pilgrim unhoods to reveal sunburned cheeks, a merchant stretches aching limbs, and a pair of children giggle as they chase each other around the benches. Their energy lifts your spirits, reminding you that community emerges even in the draftiest of inns. With breakfast concluded, the innkeeper steps forward to call out departures' names, scribbled on a worn roster, ensuring room keys are returned and any outstanding debts settled. You draw a deep breath, gather supplies, and prepare to shoulder your pack. The cool morning air invigorates you, and despite the hangover still tugging at your temples, you feel ready for the next leg of your journey. You offer a final nod to the innkeeper and fellow guests, then step outside into the courtyard's fresh morning glow. Roosters have settled, and the cobblestones gleam under the rising sun. You straighten your cloak, secure your satchel, and set your gaze on the winding road ahead. As you stride out, you remind yourself that medieval inns might have tested your grit mud grime chores and questionable lodging, but they also offered warmth, sustenance, and stories worth carrying forward. You inhale the dawn's crisp air and whisper a contented onward. You trudge back into the common room, boots caked in morning mud, and brace yourself for seasonal surprises that redefine cozy. Summer days turn these inns into ovens. Sweltering heat bakes the wattle and daub walls until the air shimmers and sweat beads drip from every pore. Medieval fact inns relied on thatch roofs and open windows for ventilation, which proved woefully inadequate during heat waves. You peel off a layer of the cloak, draping it over a chair, and crack joke. 1. Welcome to Saunas R Us, a medieval franchise. In midsummer, the courtyard's puddles evaporate, leaving dusty hollows that kick up fine grit with every footstep. You fan yourself with a scrap of cloth as a traveling minstrel collapses theatrically beside the hearth, panting like a boiled lobster. A fringe source claims some innkeepers placed water-soaked rushes on the floor to cool the air, an early air conditioning hack that smelled faintly of the swamp quirky tidbit. You sigh, longing for a teaspoon of modern breeze. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers preferred summer journeys for longer daylight or winter treks for fewer pestilence warnings. Open scholarly debate. You consider both unappealing, Too hot to sleep or too cold to think, you pocket the thought as you dip into your ale. Now more of a welcome reprieve than a vice. As autumn arrives, inns transform again. The harvest bounty bursts onto tables, late apples simmered in wine-roasted chestnuts, and pumpkin-scented pottage mainstream fact. You step outside to watch pumpkins burning in torches casting orange glow like harvest moons. You lift a mug of spiced cider, its cinnamon and clove notes warming your lips, and joke too. Who knew pumpkins could multitask as lanterns and lattes? But with autumn comes rain sheets of it that leak through thatch gaps, drumming incessantly on window shutters. You scramble to protect your blankets, pressing pots beneath drips. Fringe accounts note that some inns installed small wooden buckets on rafters to catch leaks, though often they overflowed onto unsuspecting guests' quirky tidbit. You glance up at a bucket dripping onto a passerby who shrugs. This is medieval bucket list material. Winter's icy breath then settles in nipping toes and rattling bones. You wrap a threadbare blanket tighter flames from the hearth, fighting a losing battle against the cold. Medieval inns often handed out extra blankets at a fee. A luxury for deep pockets mainstream fact. You glance at a noble nearby, swathed in furs, and joke. 3. I'm ready to trade my cloak for his credit line. Snow piles against the door, making travel in or out a treacherous expedition. You bite into a salted herring, its brine, fierce against a cold bite, and marvel that fish survived the winter journey, another testament to medieval preservation skills. Historians still argue whether inns restocked fresh produce in winter or subsisted solely on salted and dried goods. Open scholarly debate. You hope for fresh bread by spring, but brace for more preserved surprises. Through each season's turn, the inn remains a constant, a refuge, adapting to extremes, a heart fueling warmth and community. You step to the window, watching a pack of loyal dogs huddled beside the door, their bodies rising and falling in synchronized shivers. You smile, grateful that at least you're inside, sharing tales, meals, and the ever-changing seasons that define medieval inn life. You linger in the common room's amber glow as dusk deepens when an old inn regular sidles up to you with a conspiratorial grin and a furtive glance toward the hearth. Ever wonder what lies beneath these floorboards? He rasps, voice low enough to blend with the crackling fire. In medieval inns, rumors of hidden passages and smuggler tunnels were as common as spilled ale, mainstream fact. Tonight, you're about to chase whispers into the inn's shadowed underbelly. He tosses a scrap of parchment onto the table, a crudely drawn map marking a narrow corridor behind the kitchen hearth. You pocket it, heart-thudding like a fleeing deer, and slip away from the lantern-lit bustle. The cook's back is turned busy ladling supper pottage into bowls, so you nod to your guide and duck through the swinging doorway into the kitchen's smoky haze. Cobblestones, slick with grease, led you past wooden shelves stacked with onion-salted fish and half-baked pies. Historians still argue whether medieval inn cellars primarily stored foodstuffs or served as clandestine meeting spots for rebels and outlaws. Open scholarly debate. You follow your companion to a section of stone wall, stained darker than the rest. He taps 3 times in a hidden sequence rumored to mimic Morse code's ancestor, and a loose stone shifts inward with a hollow click. A narrow stair plunges into darkness, the air cold and damp. You crouch under the low-ceiling torch in hand and descend, each step echoing like a drum. Fringe tidbit: some inns boasted secret escape routes, leading to waterways allowing patrons or smugglers to vanish unseen. Quirky tidbit: you wonder if this passage leads to a hidden dock or merely to a forgotten storeroom. At the bottom, a brick-lined tunnel stretches ahead, slick with moss and faintly illuminated by the dying torchlight. rats scurry away, squeaking their disapproval at unintended guests. You swallow hard and step forward, boots splashing through shallow water pooling at the tunnel's entrance. The scent of earth and mildew hangs heavy as though the tunnel itself remembers the secrets it conceals. Your guide halts before a fork in the corridor. Left leads to the smuggler's cell. Right to the secret chapel, he whispers. Do you debate destination secret chapel? A hidden room for forbidden prayers sounds poetic. But tonight, your thirst for intrigue urges you toward the smuggler's cell. You veer left, wading through ankle-deep water that chills your bones. The tunnel narrows until you can barely squeeze through brush scraping against your cloak. Historians still debate whether such passages were constructed by innkeepers for convenience or seized from older structures, repurposed over centuries. Open scholarly debate. You steady your breath, determined to find out. At last, the tunnel opens into a vaulted chamber, lined with old crates and coils of rope. Moonlight filters through a crack in the ceiling, illuminating piles of contraband barrels of salt, crates of silk, smuggled past customs, and jugs of rare spiced wine. Your guide's eyes sparkle. You heft a jug, corked and dripping precious liquid and marble at its weight smuggled treasure, right under the inspector's nose. Silent steps announce your discovery to another figure, emerging from the shadows. A gaunt innkeeper whose grateful smile speaks of hidden incomes and debts paid in secrecy. He finger wags, not a word, or you'll borrow my dagger. You nod, clinking the spiced wine jug in salute, and pretend to examine a crate marked fragile porcelain. In reality, it contains stolen coins minted under a rival lord. Retracing your path, you rejoin the fork and opt to explore the secret chapel on the right. The passage is narrower here and the air carries a faint incense scent, a clue that this chamber may indeed have served sacred purposes. You crawl through each inch, prompting goosebumps as the candle's glow reveals a small alcove, adorned with a carved wooden cross and faded frescoes of saints. Fringe whispers held that some inns offered private chapels for clandestine confessions or covert rituals. Quirky tidbits. You dip a finger in the dusty basin once used for holy water, letting it run across your palm. A narrow slit in the far wall admits pale moonlight, casting stained glass colors onto the flagstone floor. You kneel, placing a hand on the altar's edge, cool oak, etched with dozens of pilgrims' names. You trace one faded inscription, Eleanor 1327, and imagine the fears and hopes she brought here. You murmur a soft thanks for her courage, and rise, renewed by this hidden sanctuary. You backtrack to the main tunnel and begin the climb toward the kitchen, heart pounding with your discoveries. Emerging behind the cook's back, you slip past crates of onions and powdered spices, re-entering the kitchen's warmth. Your guide offers a silent nod before melting back into the crowd of patrons waiting for stew. In the common room's glow, the hearth crackles as if beckoning you back to safety. You settle on your bench, still clutching the spiced wine jug, a tangible souvenir of secrets unearthed. As the night resumes its rhythm of laughter and song, you gaze into the fire, transported by the knowledge of hidden passages beneath your feet. You tuck the parchment map into your tunic, certain that tomorrow's travelers will continue weaving stories of smugglers' cells and secret chapels. You lift your mug in silent toast to the inn's visible warmth and its hidden wonders, both woven into the tapestry of medieval life beneath its sagging beams. You sling your satchel over one shoulder and heft your travel pack onto your back, feeling the weight of both gear and memories settle with a familiar thud. The common room stirs as dawn's light creeps through shuttered windows, pale beams cutting through the lingering smoke and ale haze. You inhale deeply the scent of burning embers and spilled mead, mingling with the crisp morning air, a signature olfactory cocktail of medieval inns, Mainstream fact. Your fingers brush the map tucked in your tunic, the edges worn and coffee-stained from last night's clandestine explorations. You finger the small X marking the secret cellar beneath the hearth, a reminder that this inn held as many hidden stories as rooms. You crack joke 1. If only GPS guided me to fresh linen and hot water. You smile at your quip, knowing you'll treasure that map with more than half the possessions strapped to your chest. The innkeeper appears at the threshold, lantern in hand, tallying departures and passing back room keys with a nod. His eyes flick to the spiced wine jug you've strapped to your pack, acknowledging unspoken understanding. You survived, you discovered, and you're welcome to return, provided you settle your coin. You hand over your remaining groats, trading metal for gratitude and a small loaf of bread for the road. Fringe whispers claim some travelers paid in stories rather than silver, yet you suspect your tale of tunnels might be worth more than your purse's contents. Quirky tidbit. You step into the courtyard, boots crunching on frost-touched mud where the roosters have retreated, and the horses embolden their yawns. A stable hand offers you a small flask of watered ale. For the journey, a customary gesture of goodwill among inns. Along dusty routes, mainstream fact. You accept with a bow, tucking the flask into an outer pocket. You raise it to your lips and sip cold barley, a whisper of last night's mead and the promise of miles ahead. You murmur joke 2, breakfast of champions, or at least of road-weary wanderers. As you stride past the stable's yawning donkeys, their breaths steaming in the dawn chill, you recall. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers favored inns for comfort or simply for their guaranteed roof, even if it leaked open scholarly debate. You shake off the thought, reminded that the thrill of roofed shelter outweighs any drip on your shoulder. You pause at the gate, turning back for a final look. The inn stands proud, timber beams bowed, but unbroken windows, glowing with promise, and a plume of smoke, spiraling from the chimney like a welcome beacon. You feel a pang of affection for this place of a spiced ale, tangled webs and secret altars. You crack joke 3. Who knew I'd missed the bucket before I even missed bedbugs? Footsteps of departing guests echo as they follow the beaten path, some trudging toward distant towns, others venturing down forested trails. You join their ranks, stepping onto the worn stones leading away from the hearth's glow. Each step carries a rhythm shaped by 4 nights of stories, betrayal at dice tables, hot pottage cold beds, and clandestine discoveries beneath the floorboards. Your cloak flutters behind you in the morning breeze, and you tighten its clasp against the chill. The path ahead curves through mist-shrouded fields, rolling hills that promise both freedom and uncertainty. You grip your staff knuckles, whitening, ready for both the road's beauty and its hazards. You recall the merchant's sly grin, the dragon doodle carved into the beams, the jester's juggling, and the monk's whispered miracles, each memory, a thread in the tapestry of the inn's living history. A crow caws overhead, and you lift your gaze to the sky where pale clouds drift across a blue expanse. You breathe in the sight of open-air roads yet traveled, and the knowledge that no inn, however storied, can rival the open world awaiting you. Yet, part of you wonders if you'll ever find warmth equal to firelight and companionship as fierce as last night's brawl callbacks. The road ahead is damp with dew. Your boots leave faint impressions on the soft earth. You press on distant church bells, tolling in salute as the morning unfolds. With every stride, you carry more than gear, you carry the inn's lingering laughter, its secrets, and the echo of crackling hearts etched into your mind. Finally, you crest a small rise, the inn's silhouette receding into the mist. You straighten your shoulders, heart buoyed by anticipation. You whisper a soft farewell. Thank you for the stories, the shelter, and the surprises. You step forward into the sunrise, pack stable on your back, and set your face toward the horizon road, ruin, an adventure awaiting your return. Morning light filters through the trees, painting the damp path with a gentle glow that warms you from within. Each breath brings the scent of dew-kissed grass and distant wood smoke, a natural symphony replacing the inn's smoky heart. The world feels vast and welcoming, yet you carry a quiet comfort. Learn in closed walls and crowded benches, though the inn's sagging beams and drafty chambers fade behind you. Their echoes remain a tapestry of laughter, whispered secrets and shared survival. Feel the pack's reassuring weight on your shoulders, not a burden, but a reminder of safety found in simple hospitality. Recall the glow of firelight on faces from every corner of life. Pilgrims, merchants, rogues, and monks, each forging community in smoke and song. Let those memories settle like embers in your mind, glowing softly as you walk. Your steps fall into a calm rhythm, the countryside's gentle undulations, lulling any lingering tension. Gravel crunches underfoot, and nearby birdsong replaces the tavern's din. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bleat of sheep, speaks of a new chapters waiting to be written on the open road. As you journey on, carry forward the inn's lessons, generosity extended over a shared mug, courage discovered in hidden tunnels, and unity found in the communal song. Let the warmth of past hearts fuel your resolve when the wind chills your bones or the path grows uncertain. Close your eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, drawing in the clarity of dawn, the promise of exploration, and the gentle whisper of adventure. Exhale any fear, allowing your spirit to expand with every heartbeat. Now step forward into morning's embrace, guided by memory and curiosity. May the road be kind, and may your footsteps echo with the inn's enduring welcome, always ready for your return.